káàbọ̀. Ẹ ṣeun púpọ̀. Okay. Ẹ káàbọ̀. Ẹ ṣeun púpọ̀.
Ẹ káàbọ̀.
Ẹ ṣeun púpọ̀.
Ẹ káàbọ̀.
Ẹ ṣeun púpọ̀.
Ẹ káàbọ̀.
Ẹ káàbọ̀ sí ilẹ̀ Sallay.
Thank you very much. So, I take it that you want some elementary self-introduction, at least to put you at ease so you know who you're talking to, outside what your teachers tell you. This will be the day of revelation for many of you. And later on, you'll take on your teachers, they say, aha, you've been teaching us the wrong thing. You finally heard it from the horse's mouth. Now, let me say first of all that I'm glad that I have the opportunity from time to time to address people your age. Most of the time in international organizations, universities, etc., at that level, you know, where you meet all these people who either make or break the world, and you think that you have ideas to reverse their activities. Usually that's where I am. And for me, it's very therapeutic to be able to talk to people like you at your age, where you can make a choice, where you're not being formed by what has already been created, where you become curious entities to whom everything is fresh and is possible. So what I've said just now already reveals quite a bit about myself, because as I was admitting earlier just now, I was a very curious child. I was in fact a nuisance, and I got punished solidly for it, because I never could accept whatever the surface reality was. I always felt there was something underneath it which I didn't understand, which I couldn't quite probe immediately, which I couldn't quite apprehend immediately, and so I had to probe, even if it was a toy. I'm afraid I had to take it to pieces, and of course I couldn't put it back on, and I got into trouble. So curiosity is on so many levels. It's not just kind of conceptual issue, even technological. It's what's working underneath it. And I suppose it's that curiosity that led me to various undertakings. I was never satisfied with, even with what I knew. I had to insist that there's something attached to it, which I didn't immediately comprehend, but which if I worked solidly at, one or two things would happen. I'd get to understand it, or unfortunately, I destroy it. But at least that's always excusable, always understandable with children. It's one of the reasons, for instance, why I never hesitate to allow students to tackle my plays. Many people, they restrict their works to professionals and so on, but me, any institution, any school at all, without even discussing royalty, I say, well, see, you want to tackle this play? Good luck to you. Children are allowed to destroy my works. Okay. Adults, that's a different matter. They have to pay very hard, you know, to get a chance to destroying or distorting anything which I do. So that's the little I think I can say about myself before I throw the floor open to questions. But I think I'd like to tell you, before I do that, just one more story about my school days. I hated mathematics. Ah, I loved mathematics, which meant that I disliked my mathematics teachers. Because they taught mathematics, because they tortured me. I just couldn't get a hold on mathematics. And what saved me eventually, because I told you I was a very curious child, what saved me was my curiosity. Even though I hated mathematics, I was curious about it. I wanted to know why, what was the problem? Why did I hate this discipline, which was such a walkover for my colleagues? And I used to have to ask them to assist me. In our school curriculum, at the time, I don't know what it is today, you did not matriculate. Even if you scored, let us say, out of 9 subjects, if you scored A out of 9 subjects, and you failed 2, one of 2, either of 2. One, the language of instruction, which happened to be English. But most critically for me, if you failed to obtain a C in mathematics, you did not matriculate. You passed, but you did not matriculate. I swatted so I could get just a C in mathematics, but it was very difficult. Now, mathematics had 3 divisions: arithmetic, algebra, and trigonometry. And it was the aggregate of your scores in the 3 which decided whether you got a P or a C or an A or F, which is outright fail. If you fail mathematics, you fail the matriculation. So came the moment of truth. School certificate examination. What was I supposed to do? So I swatted. I took all the textbooks. I read, worked with some of my colleagues who assisted me. I could not make head of it. We went to the examination hall. The first subject was algebra. When I came out of the classroom, I knew I was fixed. I was doomed. I knew I had failed algebra. Now, at night, you're supposed to be in your rooms, right? You know, in boarding school, as in boarding school, you're not allowed to go out or anything. So I snuck out the night before. The next subject was the geometry, trigonometry, etc. So I snuck out to the bathroom. I remember very well. And at night, I swatted, as we say, all night, memorizing the geometric formula, the various combinations. Drew all the triangles, quadrangles, or what they're called, quadrilateral equations. I memorized everything. I didn't sleep that night. Following day, went into the classroom, and the first thing I did was take the section which contained all the formulae. Well, it was still fresh in my head. So I dealt with that one. I promptly forgot all about it. Then the third item, I managed, I think, an average pass. When the results came out, thank goodness I had made up for the other 2 aspects of mathematics from that geometry. And that's when I discovered something I had not known before on my own about mathematics. It was geometric equations. So I discovered and stumbled on it on my own. Now, that's the first part of the story. So I took the exam. In the end, I actually managed a C, and I matriculated the school certificate. Years later, I found myself in prison detention, political causes, without books. I I wasn't permitted writing material, reading material. I was in total isolation for 22 months, when even the warders were not allowed to speak to me, or they would be in trouble during military regime. It was in the Biafran War, which you may have heard about. So what was I supposed to do without books, without writing material, reading material? After a couple of days, then I remembered my school days experience, my hatred of mathematics. Now, I'm a writer. You need pen, paper to write. Only a small amount of toilet paper is available. You could write a poem or two, and that's it. Everything was exhausted. However, there's always the soil. There's always a stick available. There's always a wall, a prison wall, and there's always a stone available. And I thought, what is the subject I can preoccupy myself with on my own, without any books, etc.? I said, hey, what about this subject which I hated when I was in school? Mathematics. Quadratic equations, I think the nasty word is, and so on. And so I began trying to recover this subject which I had left behind. I threw my books out, mathematics books. Once I got my seat, I left. I didn't want to see anything to do with mathematics. So I began working, trying to discover, I remember distinctly, the laws of permutation and combination. And through trial and error, I worked out the principles of permutation and combination. It kept me occupied with long hours in prison. And I think that is how I managed to survive a period of isolation of 22 months out of 27. I had nothing at all to nourish my mind, but I was able to go back to mathematics. Actually discover certain principles, basic principles of what I failed to discover while I was in school. So you see, never throw anything away which you have learned. You never know when it comes in useful. And so today, if I meet any mathematician, I say, come sit down. I discovered the laws of permutation and combination. I don't want to listen to you, mathematician. So never give up. That's what I'm trying to tell you now. Never give up. You might think you hate it right now, but stay curious about why, for instance, you think you hate it. Maybe it's the way you were taught. Maybe it's your temperament, which was so heavily weighed on the humanities. Maybe it's just the arduous business of those mysterious figures, those signs of less than, more than, approximately equal, plus, those jumble of linguistic symbols, I think, could have contributed to my hatred of mathematics. And so today I can describe myself as a failed mathematician, but a progressive learner in mathematical disciplines. Right, that's enough about an introduction. Yeah, let's now over to you. You see, those are things your teacher didn't teach you about me. Only I can tell you. I'm confessed to you.
Do you want to take some questions? I know you have questions. Amy.
Were you allowed to draw on the walls?
Was I allowed to flog?
No, like when you were in prison, were you allowed to draw on the walls?
Draw on the walls? Oh, I wasn't. I wasn't allowed to do anything. But then, what could they do? If I was disallowed to draw on the walls, at least I had a stick and the soil. And so if I finished, I just erased everything. So, not at all.
Sorry, Ron.
It's fine.
What are some Yoruban traditions that, like, what are some of your favorite Yoruban traditions?
Let me warn all of you, by the way. I wear a hearing aid, even though you can't see it. So you must help me by speaking up and clearly.
Okay.
Yeah, Zeke, you can just stand up and speak up.
What are your favorite Yoruban traditions?
Anything about tradition?
No, like what are your favorite Yoruban traditions?
What my favorite?
Yoruban traditions.
Oh, my favorite Yoruba tradition. Okay. Obviously, you've learned that I'm Yoruba. And without any sense of chauvinism, as objectively as I can assure you that the Yoruba culture is the greatest and most progressive in the world. Without any dispute. But what's my favorite aspect of Yoruba tradition? I think it's an aspect which is not limited to Yoruba. There are many societies in the world which actually prize childhood. By that I don't mean sentimental. You know, for instance, Yoruba tradition, children are taught to be responsible. They're given responsibilities. Not cruel responsibilities, not responsibilities beyond their age, their capability, but they're made to feel, yes, you are to be looked after, you are to be indulged, but you are part of a community, and you must play your role within that community. Now, sometimes the discipline can be a bit excessive, at least in my view, but it's very important, I think, that childhood be not denied to products of that age, on the one hand, that at the same time childhood is not to be guided in directions which the adult world has found and which have actually turned them into what they are on the positive side. You can query tradition as much as you like, but I think there's nothing worse than not being able to point even to a distinct tradition which you can then critique, if you like, and which you can adopt. I've never beaten my own children, but I've been beaten solidly, but I'm alive to tell the tale.
All right. When you were first coming to America, what was your opinion on it? Like, what is your first impression? I know you lived in America for a while. I'm from America, and I know that because it's a touchy subject in some like places because first of all I live there, but also not great policies sometimes good policies. What was you arrived in America? What was it like?
Well, let's begin with my expectation.
Mm-hmm.
America was a rival to Britain in terms of expansionism, even though Americans say they never colonized anybody, but it's always indirect colonization. And even as early as that, I'm going back now to at least half a century ago, America was very, very, America was a colony of Britain anyway. And I think America used to look enviously sometimes at Britain and its hold on the external world to it. And because the British, for instance, they denigrated American system of education, felt that Americans didn't speak English properly. There was rivalry between the parent body in America. And the British also felt that America was too republican. It wasn't monarchical, obviously. But felt that it was dangerous for our hold on colonies. And so we were discouraged from going to America. The idea was that American education system was inferior, and that even they wouldn't recognize American degrees. Products of America were, all this was there. And we, of course, being anti-colonial, became increasingly curious about just what America was. From my sense of history, this was already, yes, I'll come to that. From my sense of history, America was progressive, but racist, very racist. That America had not overcome its racist part. Well, we didn't like being shut away from American society. And there was some kind of fascination about America. It was very productive, technologically advanced. So I was expecting a highly technological society. And I made a beeline straight, because my first visit to the States, the black, quote unquote, black revolution had begun. The struggle, black is beautiful, etc., etc. And so I made straight for Harlem when I visited, straight for the writers, the playwrights. I remember mid-Manhattan was the nesting ground of names like Hakeem Adebuti, Leroy Jones, which he was at the time before he became Imam Mubaraka. So I wanted to see the fellow progressives, considered myself progressive at the time. I was hugely disappointed, but at the same time, I was hugely stimulated by the, how should I describe it, by the go-get-it attitude of Americans. I haven't seen such aggressive motion, impulse, sensibility. So it was a mixed bag, I saw racism at first hand. I experienced racism at first hand in a way I never experienced it. Right, technology. Where was that? Yes, a way in which I never experienced it in England. It is so bad. Like I have the record of having integrated a swimming pool in America when I went there in the early 60s. That swimming pool, the hotel was called Atlanta Americana. As it so happened, in fairness, I must always say this, the proprietor of that hotel was actually a liberal, but by common consent, blacks were not allowed. They never. I was the first person to swim in that pool. I just got up one morning and said, enough is enough. I jumped into the pool and nothing came out of it. And afterwards, I have to tell you, because there were people, who objected. I remember the proprietor called the staff meeting and said, listen, I'm a businessman. And anybody who pays his or her way is welcome in this hotel. You don't like it in this hotel, you can go. So that is how that swimming pool was integrated. But racism was rampant. It's amazing that with my temperament actually came out alive from the deep south on that first visit. It was very, very bad, I can tell you that. But generally, I think I liked the British were so staid, so stiff. All of my years in Britain, I didn't get that sense of creative liveliness, that energy that existed in the United States. I think you could.
Yeah, what's like your opinion on the whole Russia-Ukraine situation?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What is your opinion on the whole Russia-Ukraine situation that is happening right now?
My own is unambiguous. I think the whole world should rise up in condemnation and active condemnation of Russian action. It's very sad. It's very sad. Here is a nation which moved from feudalist, Tsarist regime to, well, extreme, the pendulum swung extreme with communist extremes, policies, economic policies of productivity, etc., and then began to move back to kind of better equilibrium, human equilibrium, humane equilibrium, opening up of the society. I don't mind telling you, for instance, George, let's talk frankly here. I don't mind telling you that I was involved in my connection with the underground resistance, very mild, please don't misunderstand me, in the Soviet Union, the samizdat production. Samizdat was the counter journalism that went on there. I remember visiting at one time, which I would meet somebody at a railway station, and I would walk behind, perhaps in the middle, to the next stop where I would be picked up by a car, and then I would meet the dissidents in the Soviet Union. So it was wonderful, because when you got inside Russian society and you found the dissidents, they're usually writers and artists, but creating a community of their own. And one of the greatest gifts at the time that you could take with you when you were invited to those soirees underground was a bottle of whiskey. Because things were so hard. Brought a bottle of whiskey. But then they wouldn't even keep it and say, okay, we'll keep the whiskey and let's serve you vodka. But they say, okay, let's drink it on the spot. That's how the nature of the Russians were at the time. I mean, very warm, and of course, the culture, the ballet, the folk music, there are some marvelous culture that went on in the Soviet Union. And to see that whole society opening up, where you don't have to have special signals where you're meeting your fellow writers, follow them in the devotion. And Russia became part of what I call the human society. And then to see this Putin, whatever his name is, now taking the Russian society back to the primitive era is very depressing for me personally. Maybe it's one of the reasons why I was saying earlier, I think I'm giving up on adults completely. I'm relying on you people to transform the world. Next question. Could you pick among these? I don't know, some of them are more active than others, so you know them all. So why don't you decide?
What is your personal definition of freedom?
Personal definition of
Freedom.
freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom with responsibility. I don't believe in absolute freedom. All of us have senses of volition, wishes, preferences, constantly adjudicated by consideration for others. So I don't believe in absolute freedom. There is no such thing. However, the very right to agree or disagree with others about what society can do or not do, and to be able to admit, be able to concede when the majority, out of their own free will, have decided that it is this cause or that cause. That, for me, is the real meaning of freedom. That freedom to choose to be part of a community and to be able to subject yourself to the overall opinion of the majority, for me, is freedom, even when you're not free to act in a particular way as an individual. But when that is taken away, it's worse than dictatorship. It's enslavement, it's slavery. Right? Okay, young lady.
So, I have a question. When you went away from Africa, why did you went away? Because did it have a reason? Why did you went to America and other places? Why didn't you stay in Africa?
Why didn't I stay in Abeokuta? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I have a profession. I think I'm a compulsive teacher. I think so. Not as good as my father was. I just have some of his genes in. He was a remarkable teacher. Me, I'm not as patient as my father was. And so, as a teacher, as my profession, if I'm invited somewhere to talk, to lecture, I go there. And I'm a playwright, which means that I follow my work wherever the work leads. And I hold workshops, and I meet other playwrights, and I'm also an essayist. And there are always issues to discuss across national borders. But make no mistake, I've never been a citizen of anywhere else. My home is called Ijegba. And you won't even find Ijegba on the map, any map. Ijegba is a combination of Ijebu, which I am on my father's side, and Egba, which I am on my mother's side. And since I'm a very independent-minded person, I wanted a republic of my own. So I named it the Republic of Ijegba. I'm the president, the vice president, the foreign secretary, the chief cook, the gardener, or something. It's a one-man republic, the native of Ijegba. I even managed to smuggle it onto my passport. Look at my passport, it says Ijegba, but you won't find it on the map. That's my home. Yes.
In your life, you have dealt with a lot of people with very strong opinions, including racism and just any opinions that would contradict your morals or beliefs. In your opinion, do people with those strong opinions have the benefit of the doubt when it comes to things that are not directly related to them? For example, would you still agree to read an unrelated, I don't know, piece of poetry by a racist poet or something of that sort?
Well, I would read such poetry for my own instruction, just so that I don't live in cloud cuckoo land, thinking that everybody is on the same quote-unquote progressive and humanistic wavelength as I am. It's important to know your enemy, absolutely. I read Mein Kampf, I read it for my own personal instruction. We've got to learn about how the other side thinks, even if it means that immediately after you, shall we say, you're compelled to polish your rifle. Look at what's happening to us with religious fundamentalism today. When I was a student, I was very curious about the spiritual pursuit, the pursuit of, shall we say, trying to coalesce sensibilities. We go beyond the material. I've never been a religious person, but I think I'm basically a spiritual person. And as a student, I used to go to the various religious services, mosque, synagogue, Roman Catholicism, the Pentecostals, and so on. I went to all of them. And after that, I felt I'd acquired enough knowledge about religion to be able to live at peace with myself in whatever spiritual direction I wanted to go. Until a few years ago, with the rise of religious fundamentalism of the most aggressive and homicidal kind, which I decided I better go back and study some more so as to be able to contest this instinct, this curious level of belief which says that it is right to kidnap children in the name of religion, take them into the forest, disperse them anywhere, sell some on the slave market, ransom some back to the government, their parents. So obviously, I haven't learned enough about this religion for me to be taken by surprise. Why? How is it possible for any human being, any adult, to say that for a child to go to school, a child deserves to have his or her throat slit, and the parents to be whipped in the public domain for daring to send the children to school? So it meant, for me to be taken by surprise, meant that I hadn't learned enough about that religion. To be able to fight them, I have to know even more. Where did the aberration take place? Was it there within the religion from the beginning? Was it the usual human factor which distorted the principles, the precepts of that religion? One had to know it to be able to fight. You've already asked them.
Yeah.
Keep it nice, so I'm not picking the
Or Sasha.
new voices.
Sasha's been invited.
Sure. So, in literature class, we have read your play *Death and the King's Horseman*. The Yoruba characters speak in a very different language than the British characters, with a lot of metaphors and very symbolical expressions. Is that how Yoruba speakers usually speak in English, or is it a translation of the Yoruba language into English?
You said something about, I missed that part, that something like the voice. Is that what I heard? I'm not sure.
Again, just
Something about a voice, I missed that. But please repeat that,
okay.
concise, make it
Yeah.
concise.
We have read in literature class your play *Death and the King's Horseman*. The Yoruba characters speak in a very different way from the British characters.
From
from the British characters.
sorry,
the British.
speak very differently from,
The British.
The officer, the British officer.
oh, the office,
Yes,
okay,
yes, right.
all right.
And I want to know whether this is how Yoruba speakers speak in English, or whether it is a translation of the Yoruba language into
Okay, I
English.
thought that was it, all right. Well, you know, there are also comic scenes in the play, even though it's a tragedy. And usually, it's a dramatic trick, part of the bag of tricks, to make the comic character, the character you want to make comic, speak a kind of language, even if it doesn't exist. In this particular case, actually just adopted the kind of English somebody with that level of education would use. It's a kind of mixture of broken grammar, syntax, infusion of some words of his own language, etc., etc. That was quite deliberate. And that's the kind of language you find very often among people of a certain class or profession or upbringing or whatever. Unfortunately for all of us, some of those eventually they join the army and they become the dictators and masters of life and death over the rest of society. But Sergeant Amusa in particular, right? That's one of those we're referring to. He represented the will of the colonial master, and therefore I wanted to make him ridiculous.
Right.
So we've read your book in literature class, where you tell about your childhood, and I had a question, like, so after all that happened in that time, would you look back at your childhood as at a nice period of your life or not?
It's not true to, if I said that I look back to that time, it would be inaccurate. But naturally, it's always with one, especially if one sees that the generation, the childhood of the new generation is disadvantaged in relation to what one enjoyed as a child. Then there's a kind of, not quite guilt, but a sense of responsibility. What has gone wrong? You have to ask yourself, what has gone wrong? I mean, it wasn't that my childhood was idyllic. No. It wasn't ideal or anything. It was checkered. It was mixed. And there's nothing wrong with that, basically, as long as the negative is not so extreme that it destroys the child completely. So to say I look back with nostalgia, I don't know, but it's there as a kind of touchstone. In other words, the quality of life, whether for adults or for children, should be on the rising side, not lowering. For me, that's not what humanity is about. It's supposed to improve our quality of existence. It's, imagine, look at us here, look at all of you here. here we are having this very calm, civilized, hopefully chat, exchanging ideas. Just close your eyes for a moment and try and imagine suddenly gunshots all around. Imagine sudden incursion, bursting in. Everybody lie down flat. Immediately. Not a squeak. Right, then one by one, rise, and then you are herded into a vehicle. You are being driven along the road. You don't know where. You open your eyes, you get slapped or pistol whipped or gun butt in your head until you arrive at nowhere. And that's the last you see of your parents, your families, your siblings for a long time. Months, moving into years now, in which over 100 school pupils like you have disappeared from us forever. Now, that's not the kind of childhood I went through. And for me, it's not acceptable. Something has gone wrong. There's been a dereliction of responsibility. Some malignant growth has entered into society and had to be cauterized. So it's not that one looks back necessarily, it's just that it comes up as a yardstick by which you gauge how much you've achieved as a humane society in relation to your own childhood.
What book would you recommend, or what is your favorite book
My favorite book at what age?
right now?
Right now, oh, all right. My favorite book right now, oh, I can't remember what I was reading. Part of the problem with that question is I come from a society where, ever heard of a traffic jam? Real traffic block. And the way you survive it, if you're like me, is that you go with a traveling library, books on one side, and a drink or two on the other. Make life easier. When you enter a standstill, which can last 3 hours. And so you're reading several books at once. That's really the point I'm trying to get at. Of those, what have I read recently that I really like? Oh, yes. I can't say it's my favorite book. Let's just say that it's one of the most recent books I've really loved. It's Elif Shafak, The Island of Missing Trees. She's a Turkish writer, female, and really a remarkable, unusual book. And I think that's the most interesting book I've read in the last year, Elif Shafak. If you get run into it, get hold of it and read it. I think you'll be fascinated by it. It's both historical and the human, it deals with the whole gamut of human relationships. In fact, you could almost say it echoes what's going on right now in some ways, between Russia and Ukraine, because it writes about Greek and Cyprus. And during those turbulent days between the two, the one trying to annex the other, and the Cyprus getting divided between the Turks and the Greeks and so on. It's kind of interesting. Just occurred to me now that, it's an echo of what we're witnessing right now.
Ali, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you wish you knew or had in your childhood?
What do I wish that I had in my childhood
Yes.
that I didn't have?
Yes.
These children of yours, they ask some very difficult questions. What do I wish that I had? Give me 1 second to think. What is that I never had? I can't think of any. I think I just used to make do. The challenge, I suppose, of not having something meant that you learned to improvise. And so, if I remember something, I'll get back to that question. It's a very fascinating question.
What you wish you didn't have in your childhood?
What?
What you wish you didn't have in your childhood?
What do I think I gained from my
What do you
childhood?
wish you didn't have?
I didn't have.
Child.
I wish the cane didn't exist. Found some other ways of punishing one. And those mean parents and their relations, they wielded a very heavy hand when you were caught misbehaving. But, it's so part of
Max had a question over there.
toughening
Vice
up.
Chair. Max.
So you said that when you kind of researched a lot of different religions at once and went to all like synagogues, churches, the mosques. It reminds me of the beginning of the book The Life of Pi.
Oh,
the beginning of the book The Life of Pi. When the main character Pi is once Christians, Hindu, and Muslim. And I thought that's my questions.
Okay.
Well, while you're thinking of, let me explain, by the way, that I came from a very religious family. My father was not just a school teacher, he was a church warden, he went regularly. I was in the choir, Anglican church. We had to go to Sunday school, and all the various seasons were celebrated, harvest, Easter, the whole lot. And even those who were not Christians, like the Muslims, they involved us in their seasons, their religion. In other words, we celebrated with them. And similarly, they celebrated with us. So religion was something we took for granted. Everybody had their own pattern of belief. But when you are obliged to go to church every Sunday, learn the catechism, learn by heart certain passages of the Bible, and you had the traditional religionists, you had the Muslim religionists, you had even within the Christian religion, the Pentecostals, the Anglicans, the Roman Catholics, who were very ritualistic. I used to attend a lot of those. When you have that kind of plethora of ways to Godhead, you ask questions. And so that's why when I left Nigeria to go and study in Britain, I decided I wanted to go to all these various ones to find out just what spirituality was all about. That is the reason why my reason, why every opportunity I just slipped into the nearest place of worship, just to see how all these were related to my own traditional religion, which is known as the Orisha. Just curiosity once again.
Kenny.
Do you like modernist literature and writings?
You know, I have to leave that to critics. It's the critics who will decide whether my writing is modernist or traditionalist. Is that your question?
No, do you like modernist literature? Do you
What?
like it?
Oh, do I like it?
Yeah.
Oh, I consume everything. And fortunately, or unfortunately, there's so much literature in the world that if I'm into a book and I find I'm not really gaining anything from it, no kind of pleasure, I just throw it aside and pick up another book. So it's fine. Tastes are very eclectic.
Zeke.
What was your favorite food when you were a child, and what is your favorite food now?
What was my favorite poem, did you say?
No, what was your favorite food?
What's your favorite food?
Book.
Food.
Oh, food! Oh. As a child, oh, that's very easy to answer, because I once fought my very best friend by that particular item of food, and that was pounded yam. Pounded yam and stew. Today, for some reason, I've gone off pounded yam. I eat it, I enjoy it, but it's not something now, I suppose traveling all over the place, you get to eat all kinds of things. Sometimes you even get confused. But all I know is I like my food to have some pepper in it. In fact, I'm not sure, I think I have my traveling pepper pot somewhere around. Must be in my bag somewhere.
Yeah, Ron.
Cool. When you received your Nobel Prize, what was going through your mind? Like, was it, wow, this is such an honor? Was it, yeah, I deserve this? Was it something, what was streaming through your mind at the moment of you receiving the Nobel Prize?
So these ones ask some really difficult questions. I think maybe the best way to answer is that I never expected. The Nobel Prize has nominators. 7 universities identify, the humanities with the various disciplines, whether it's physics, chemistry, medicine, or literature. And since I was teaching in Harvard during that period, I was a nominator, and we had a small caucus that used to nominate. I nominated from Africa, Leopold Sédar Senghor of negritude fame, nominated Aimé Césaire. In fact, the year that I received the Nobel Prize, we had nominated again Leopold Sédar Senghor. So it was totally unexpected, and I didn't really know how to deal with it. Because I realized immediately that this was a very important prize. Before that, it was just a prize, but when it hits you, then somehow you realize it's something rather, which is regarded as unusual and unique. So, let's put it this way, that the first conscious decision that I made when I began to see the signs of what was yet to come was that nobody and no prize was going to stop me being myself. I said, no way. I don't care what is expected of me, but nobody was going to try and derail what I believed in, how I behaved, how I relate to people, etc., etc. That, I think, was the first conscious decision, when I realized that the world had certain expectations of you because you had won the Nobel Prize, therefore were supposed to be transformed. I said, no, I'm going to carry on the way I've always done.
Yeah, Artem. Artemi.
Do you have any favorite sport?
Any favorite sport? Sport. It used to be soccer. In fact, in college, when I was in Leeds, I was actually in the third 11 of Leeds University. And let me give you some lighter note to this exchange. And I'll tell you when I stopped my football career. It was winter, and we were on the field, cold. And I used to play left wing. And on this particular day, in this field of mush and slush and cold and really cold wind, the ball simply didn't come my way. So I was freezing. Now at that time I had a jalopy, one of these 25-pound puppies I bought, tinkered with it. And I used to use that to carry the team. Maybe even that's why they allowed me to be on the team. I don't know. And so the entire team would climb into this vehicle. I can't remember what make it was. Really ancient, but we had to make an excuse to help us. And I used to drive this team, this ungrateful team, to the football field. And on that day, it was bad. The ball just wasn't sent to me. Maybe I wasn't playing well. Half time, I went into the locker room, as you say, and I looked out on the field, and it was still cold. So when everybody trooped back on the field, I went back to the car and drove back to Germany. I just abandoned everybody. Soccer is not for me. And that was the end of my career. But I still took an interest in soccer. and I used to watch. I used to go to football matches. I did stuff. Until soccer became a dance competition. It was no longer soccer. It was no longer what I enjoyed about it, which was teamwork. You know, coordinating, almost like a choreographed display, ball there, the dribble, pass, head, etc. No, it was like every player was waiting for the moment to score a goal, and then to do an honor lap, and do a dance routine, and do a somersault, and beat themselves on the I said, wait a minute, why are you insulting? I'm here to enjoy a game, and all you're doing because you scored a goal, which was the work of the entire team. And the dance routine became even more interesting than the soccer itself. So I stopped going to a football match.
In your opinion, what is the most important part of a culture that is needed to be shared with a person who doesn't know anything about? Like language, religion, their beliefs, their opinions, and what is the most important part in your opinion?
Human relationships, I think. The human relationship that I think is the heart of most cultures around the world. Not the art, the precipitates, the artistic work, all of those important, but the most important for me, the culture of human relationships at its most humane.
Nathan?
So you released a book last year, but before that you haven't written in a big while. So
Sorry, say that again.
So you released a book last year, but before that you haven't written in a very long time. So why did you not write for that period of time and then last year write a new book?
No, but I was always writing. I've always been writing. Either poetry or plays. So you're referring to a specific genre, the novel?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Let me confess, I've never considered myself a novelist. Prose fiction, yes. I used to write short stories. I grew up, my literary career began with poetry and short stories. And then I gave up on not give up, somehow this was taken over by theater. And I consider myself primarily a poet and a dramatist. And the novels which I'd written before were actually, my first novel was the result of my being unable to work with my theater company. I used to run a theater company, something during the time. So I wasn't really working in the theater, and I just said, okay, I don't know how it happened. I called it a happening. The Interpreters, the first novel. And then it tried to become a habit, and I followed it up with Season of Anime, which is not as satisfactory because there was too much jargon in it. But theater, essays, polemics, etc., politics, direct politics as opposed to literary politics, just took over completely, but basically theater. Then, and this has to do with my environment, I watched my society degenerate, really degenerate. All kinds of abominations, degradation, not just corruption, which one had got used to, could manage. We're talking about the devaluation of human life, ritual killings, kidnappings we talked about, kidnapping either for ritual or in the name of one deity or another. The tumult, and civil war had taken place, but I didn't believe that civil war should really destroy humanity. And you found, even somebody has a question which I answered, human relationships, right? And even human relationships have become almost negotiable in terms of material gain. And it had been building up in me. I didn't set out instantly to say I want to write a novel. No, obviously it had been building up inside me. It had been expressed in other forms, this degradation, but obviously that was not enough. I needed a huge plenum, a cast of thousands, if you like, and prose fiction seemed to be it. But I distanced myself so much from prose fiction that I couldn't even begin until I set aside, and this may be useful for those of you who want to be writers, novelists, until I could have in hand at least 2 weeks away from the supply resource, which is my own country. I needed to be able to get away completely for at least 2 weeks. So I began looking for a residence somewhere. And one of my young colleagues offered a place in Dakar. The village is called Yene, on the seaside. And it was available for me for 10 days. And that's when I first began to set this thing down. But then, of course, I had to go back to real life. And for a long time, nearly a year, I didn't go back to it. I just needed that distancing, complete distancing. Then it became again overwhelming. I looked again for another residence, and I found one in Ghana, in a place called Aburi, near Accra, which is a very different one. It belonged to a former prime minister, a former president of Ghana, Mr. Kufuor, who happened to be a friend. And it was a baronial mansion in which I was fed silly. In fact, I think the waiters there put on more weight than I did. The food was always there, all around the clock. I mean, they were really treated royally. There were peacocks around the place, used to wake me up with an ugly noise whenever I was falling asleep at the typewriter. And I was able to put in another 8 days or so. So I had a chunk, had 2 chunks ready now to be woven into the quilt work of the novel. And then I began writing, like I do today, while traveling, bits and pieces. I'd been able to set down that solid foundation through that period of isolation. So that's how it happened. I didn't really set out, as I said, I want to write a novel. It was the material itself which just forced me into that particular mode.
Thank you. I think I have one last question. I have a bunch of questions that some people from here wrote and some people sent to us. I think I will ask one last one, and after that we can informally chat, and I know that people really wanted to take pictures. These kids are usually not allowed to have their phones during the day, but today we made an exception because they all wanted to take pictures with you. Yeah, so a last question. I'm not sure who this is from. This is anonymous. But the question is, I read that you ran away on a motorcycle during the Civil War. Is that true?
No, it wasn't during the Civil War. It was under the dictatorship of Sani Abacha, the most brutal, most kleptocratic ruler Nigeria had ever experienced. He was a torturer, and for about a year, we managed to survive. I continued writing, criticizing the government, and finally, I got word that I was about to be arrested, placed under house arrest. And I knew what that meant. So, with the utmost reluctance, I decided to go hunting, which is one of my hobbies, favorite hobbies, and went into the bush and reappeared on the other side of the national border. It isn't that I left, I lost my way. I found myself in Benin. What was I supposed to do? Go back? No. So, no, it's a very carefully organized escape on the back of a motorcycle. I've written about it in You Must Set Forth at Dawn. But it was time to leave and organize, join others in organizing the resistance outside, which is what we did. I set up a radio station within Nigeria, We moved into Norway, which hosted us very generously, and we were able to broadcast into Nigeria and even send people in there with tape recorders to interview people secretly, the markets, the factories, and so on, and then send it to us outside, and then play back to the entire nation. And I think I don't know that I've ever toured the world as much as I did during that period, mobilizing and organizing. So yes, I'm afraid it was time to take what I called a political sabbatical for health's sake.
Thank you so much for sharing very much.
You're welcome.